Good evening and welcome to tonight's virtual STEM Cafe. Board Game Renaissance, leveraging virtual connections in a time of physical distancing. Wait 1 minute. I'm Dr. Judy Diamond, organizer of the STEM Cafes for the past 8 years, and I'm going to be your host this evening. Our STEM Cafes are brought to you by NIU STEAM and the Center for P20 Engagement at Northern Illinois University. Thanks to the generosity of our patrons, we're able to offer this webinar free of charge. Please consider making a donation so we can continue to provide engaging programs like this one. If you'd like to make a donation, you can use this link, go.niu.edu/give NIU STEAM. NIU STEAM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Math. STEM Cafes are fun, casual monthly gatherings where adults can eat, drink, and chat with STEM professionals about hot topics and the latest research. We look forward to getting back to our restaurants for STEM Cafes. Tonight, you're going to have to provide those beverages, your favorite snacks, and some of those takeouts. But in the meantime, we have one of our partner restaurants, Fatty's Pub and Grill in DeKalb, offering a 10% discount to anyone who mentions that they attended the STEM Cafe. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the format in case you haven't attended our STEM Cafes before. The presentations by the speakers, and we'll have 2 this evening, will last for approximately 1 hour. So each of them will speak for approximately a half an hour. Following their talks, we're going to give you just a couple of minutes to put some questions and comments into your Q&A. And then we'll follow that with discussion. You can actually put some questions and comments in during their talks, but we will not be writing in answers during their talks or responding to them until the discussion portion of the evening. Our STEM Cafe will conclude at 8 o'clock or when we have completed our discussion. If you are experiencing any problems with sound or hearing tonight, if you check on your Zoom controls, you will see that you can actually control your own volume. So I recommend that you check that. This STEM Cafe today will be recorded, and we have recorded all of our STEM Cafes since we have been virtual. If you would like to find this recorded STEM Cafe, you can find it in about a week. If you go to NIU's website, put in STEM Cafes, and then you'll find our past STEM Cafes, our recorded STEM Cafes, and our upcoming STEM Cafes. Give us about a week because we will be closed captioning this recording as we need to make it accessible to all. So in about a week, this recording will be available. Tonight, you might have been thinking a lot about the holidays approaching and wondering just how you're going to connect with your family and friends, both at home and far away. And recently, many of you have probably rediscovered games. Well, tonight, you're going to learn about how board games, watch parties, and other fun virtual activities can provide bonding and a sense of spontaneous togetherness. You're probably wondering, how can I create meaningful social interactions through virtual gatherings? And you're probably wondering, well, what are the benefits of board gaming in a digital age? These are topics that we will be discovering this evening. We have 2 speakers. Dr. Paul Booth is coming to us from DePaul University. He is currently the professor of media and cinema studies at DePaul University. He has received his PhD in communication and rhetoric from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and his MA from our own Northern Illinois University in the communication program. Dr. Booth researches board games in a digital culture. His areas of interest are subcultures and communities, especially media and online communities. He's also an avid gamer and fan. Our second speaker on the screen here, but actually going to be our first speaker tonight, is Dr. Suzanne Deggs-White. She is Northern Illinois University's chair and professor in the Department of Counseling and Higher Education. She has earned her PhD from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro in counseling and counselor education. Suzanne is also a licensed counselor focused on family and relationship counseling. She also has 20 years as a counselor educator, teaching courses in family counseling and counseling children and adolescents. Suzanne, would you like to begin?
Yes, I would. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, thank you, Judy, for that kind introduction, and thank you to everyone. I see my video is gone. One moment, please. Thank you to everyone who's here tonight to learn more about the value of social connection and engagement, even if it's mediated by a tangle of wires and cables right now. I'm going to talk a little bit about the variety of ways to connect with your friends and family via the internet, and then turn the podium over to Paul, who'll be speaking about the renaissance of board games. Here are a few photos of what many of us probably hope our lives will look like soon. Family gatherings around the groaning board, piled high with favorite holiday dishes, holiday traditions carrying on as they have in years past, maybe tailgating with your friends, the excitement of game day and team rivalries, and cooking together, dining together, decorating together, and likely exchanging holiday gifts. Weddings have been put on hold, baby showers have been turned virtual. The world has changed very much in the last 8 months, and yet we're still trying to find creative ways to connect with the people we love and hold dear in our hearts. Unfortunately, this is what many of our Thanksgiving days might look like this year. Unless you've been quarantine bubbling with your extended family and network of friends, you may find yourself talking turkey at a table for one. I think we're all used to being isolated and away from people. You know, we kind of had the 4th of July, Labor Day, Memorial Day. We've sacrificed an awful lot of holidays as we've dealt with the pandemic. But I think Thanksgiving and then the winter holidays are going to be especially hard for a lot of us because of the traditional get-togethers that we have during that time of year. But fortunately, the family tree can get an upgrade now. Even if we can't be physically present with the people we care most about, we can definitely be creative in our efforts to connect across the city, state, country, and all around the globe. Just like Ancestry.com revolutionized the genealogy research and family history tracing that many of us like to do, the internet has revolutionized family get-togethers. Even family reunions are happening in virtual spaces and spread out across meeting times with a variety of engaging activities. You can still order that family reunion t-shirt for everyone, just ship them to each family member directly, and then you wear them when you show up online. We're finding ways to get back together again, even if we have to do it through a screen. And we can't replicate the aroma of our grandmother's snickerdoodle cookies straight from the oven. We can't replicate the taste of mulled cider or the feel of an embrace from your mom through the internet. But virtual gatherings do allow us to engage more fully than just a telephone call will. And the US mail will get us that box of snickerdoodle cookies or that newly knitted sweater fresh off your great aunt's knitting needles right to your doorstep. So we're learning to make sacrifices and find creative ways to keep those family relationships going strong, even if we have to let go of some of what we think of when we think of family time. Even if you're at home all alone, pecking out a tune on your computer keyboard or your piano, or strumming your sixth string or beating your drum, you can still reach out to others to share your music and the experience. We've come a long way from tin cans on the string. Technology can turn our computers into a variety of creative resources that allow us to connect with friends and family in really creative ways. From functioning as musical instruments to playing to whiteboards for drawing, computer technology inspires our creativity. And everyone can join in the fun. Using Zoom for jamming out with friends and family, your garage band can keep on going, internet jam sessions can happen. We just have to learn to find creative ways to make sure the needs we have that are strongest are able to be met. In research on music and the internet, playing Name That Tune, sing-alongs, karaoke, all these creative ways, music is something that brings us great joy. Most of us enjoy singing songs around the piano at different times, happy birthday, songs we sing. Music is something that kind of we all connect. And so finding ways to listen together, listening parties, online concerts are great ways to connect with people you care about. And again, jamming out with your friends and family. In fact, one research study showed that people who sang in virtual choirs actually had more of a feeling of social presence with the people they were singing with than when they were face-to-face standing side by side in a choir practice. There's something about putting yourself into this space and sharing something online in this wonderful way of connecting that really does feel in a different way, if not the same way, but can be equally significant and meaningful to us when we allow ourselves to immerse ourselves in the experience. Fireside chats and high-speed connections, you're only limited by your imagination and sometimes by your bandwidth. With your cell phone alone, you can participate in lots of online games with relatives and friends wherever they live and you live. You can host watch parties, karaoke nights, scavenger hunts, charades, word games, and so on with your cell phone alone, or you can use your internet and computer to create more stable game platforms. But one thing that's important to note when you're going to set up a game night or a certain event with family and friends, you need to make time to plan for tutorials at the start of new line-on experiences with folks who may be less savvy with technology, especially around the holidays when you're engaging with folks who don't use computers as frequently as you might yourself. Whether it's the basics of Zoom calls, microphones, cameras, or the chat feature, make sure everyone is on the same page, web page and metaphorical page, so everyone can communicate together and enjoy being together in that moment. And for games, make sure everyone understands how to use control keys, passcodes are known, rules are known. Take time to explain them thoroughly to minimize confusion or hard feelings if misunderstandings lead to poor game performance or game losses. Sometimes when you're trying to connect with people and teach them new skills on the internet, it can be frustrating. So making sure you take time, build time in, or give tutorials before the game night can be really helpful so that folks don't feel left out. Being okay with technology is important, and the more we practice, the more facile we get. We all know that ourselves after spending a lifetime, I think, learning new computer skills. But make sure everyone's able to keep up with the game and no one's getting left behind. Being patient is super important when we're teaching anyone new skills. We can also celebrate life's big moments in virtual gatherings, from video conference calls to on-the-job mobile party hubs. Video calls provide the means to celebrate, I apologize, to celebrate in the presence of those we care most about. For birthdays and anniversaries, you can plan ahead and send out electronic invitations, evites. You want to include directions for gift giving, either gifts delivered directly to the recipient, so you need to include addresses, or no gift rules, which is also pretty awesome. If you're hosting, send out goodie bags ahead of time and maybe include decorations for the folks who will be coming to the party or the event, so each guest can feel like they're a part of the celebration too. And it can make for some really fun Zoom photos when you have everybody well stocked with the decorations and the favors. Another fun thing can be scavenger hunts that folks are using at showers, at birthday parties, at just get-togethers. They're almost more fun when you're having someone confined to their house, because you can have some really creative things to include on the list of things to be found. You can write your own list, or there's plenty of ways to find them online with lists of items to hunt on the scavenger hunt. You can tailor a list to young kids, adolescents, or adults. They could include toys, household items, things from the fridge, things under the bed, things from the pantry. For wedding showers, some cool ideas. If it's a lingerie shower, have some risque items folks are supposed to pull out, or have some really funny things, tools and whatnot, and always include some silly things on the list for a laugh. Trying to make sure that whatever we share online, when it's a party, when it's a happy event, making sure you have some connections to bring people together and to focus on what we're doing one-on-one, and not being so focused on the fact that you are one-on-one in your own space. Goodie bags can be creative as you want. One person I know organized a shower for a friend, and because the couple had lived in so many different places, she took time to get Earl Grey tea to represent the time the couple spent in London, cheese from Wisconsin, Ghirardelli chocolate for the time they spent in San Francisco, and then a little bottle of champagne just because it's a party. So when you do something online, even though you're having to send things out to people all around, the joy is when you're all together opening the goodie boxes or opening up that split of champagne and celebrating the moment, and letting the internet, letting this social connection still happen, and learning how to let that be as organic as it might be when you're together in a space. From happy hours to water cooler chats, Monday morning quarterbacking sports huddles, you name it, there's a reason to get together and connect. And it's really essential that we stay connected, and we don't lose sight, like, oh, I've done so many Zoom calls, I just can't do another one. Taking a break is fine, but totally kind of disappearing from your friendship group is something to be concerned about. It's important that we don't let ourselves isolate so completely that folks forget to include us in invitations. And also, if you have a friend who stopped showing up in Zoom calls, has gotten really hesitant, make sure you reach out to that person. Social connection is kind of the glue that holds society together, but also social connections are what keep us healthy and keep our well-being strong. So make sure that you don't let yourself fall off the radar. And if someone's falling off the radar, make sure you check in on them. Creating themed events can be fun when you're having guests dress up in costumes for big events. Have them match the game you're playing or the event you're celebrating. You can create themed background contests to spark creativity in everyone, so people have fun setting up for game night and the event and getting in the mood of what they're going to be doing. Some folks I know have Hawaiian shirt night for their events, team apparel, cheer squad equipment, character t-shirts, whatever goes, whatever you and your group would be doing if y'all got together, or if you want to entertain people, think about ways to be really creative in what you've got in the background behind you or what you're wearing. And some of the benefits to having online game nights, online events, more flexibility in scheduling, there's less time to prepare. You don't have to clean the whole house. If you got an up-to-date computer, you can get your fancy Zoom background, download a picture. My computer, unfortunately, isn't up to speed. I don't have a green screen, so I just have to clean one corner of my house and still feel like I'm showing up all right. Less complicated planning for the menu, for decorations when you're doing an online program, online event, but making sure you share some of the goodies and the decorations pre-party with your friends. If you live in the same town, drop them off in their mailbox. If they live far away, send them off through the mail or through another delivery service. It's less expensive to host an online party too, and it's easier for guests to attend, because most events you can make time for an hour or two, but if you travel across the city or if you have to do more get babysitting, there are a lot of ways that having online events can really be a benefit right now. So taking advantage of that and maybe continuing these wonderful ways of connecting after a stay-at-home advisory lifts and the world gets back to some kind of new normal. Some of the benefits of virtual engagement include sharing media use, like watching the same show, doing listening to music together, going to concerts, and that can really feed discussions and give you things to think about. It invites focused communication. Families can play games together. Families can, even at home, when you watch a show with your kids or with different generations, it gives you focused communications. And a lot of times we can talk about difficult issues when they're out there on a show we're watching, or when feelings or emotions come up in games that bring up anxiety, fear, frustration. So there are a lot of ways we can benefit with the family conversations when we have something external to kind of focus our energy on. They deepen bonds through shared experiences as well, because you're going through something together and it's another event that you'll have in common, whether it's a show that you've watched and you think about concert, music you've listened to together, if it's a game you played, it takes you somewhere. It takes you out of the day-to-day life and transports you, and it creates this new experience that all the family would be sharing. And it also strengthens connections. When we share something with another person, we really feel a lasting sense of change from that and a connection. There are times in our lives where we might just know someone for maybe a half hour, for an hour, where we might be sharing some moment, and we feel good about that bond. We feel good when we reach out and make a new connection. So even if a relationship, if we meet someone, crowded elevator is often a good example, where we're in a confined space with someone and it's easier to share with them, we talk with them, and we communicate in ways that we might not communicate that quickly in a regular relationship, but that shared experience and that connection to them, it may not be a lasting friend, but it does something good for us as a person. Connections make us feel better, just the way humans are built, that we want social connection. And so sharing the experience now where we're connecting through online, internet, media is just a really good way to continue that connection that we need so much to feel good about ourselves. With Zoom calls, it gives us a chance to check in more effectively with folks who live alone. It enhances communication with those dealing with hearing loss too. And that's something to think about as we try to stay in touch with older generations or with folks who deal with some kind of ability issue. But Zoom calls give you more, you see me, you can see my lips, you can hear me, and it gives you more of a fuller picture and can make communication with those who have issues with communication a little bit easier. It enhances communications. We feel included when we're all seeing one another on the screen. We can feel much more included than if we're just on the end of a telephone and we hear 6 people trying to talk at once. When we're online, we can see everyone and there's more of that kind of give and take, and we can keep up with the conversation better because folks are more aware of body language of people in the room, in the online virtual room. And currently, it's as close to teleportation as we can get right now. I think about Beam Me Up, Scotty, and how 3D movies, all these things. And right now, having our virtual connections is as close as we can get to being in the same room with folks who are miles away, a globe away. And there's a sense of inclusion with that we get with Zoom calls. But there are also while there are benefits to technology and virtual engagement, there's some constraints too that we need to be aware of. So when we're setting up events with other people, we're mindful of these and recognize there might be some hesitation folks have. Some of the technology challenges include fear of the camera and being on display, the sense of having to perform when you're on the screen, and cybersecurity may worry some people. We've heard a lot about Zoom bombing, and it can be very disruptive and very disturbing when it happens to a family call, happens to a work call. So prepare again for some coaching time prior to an event. If needed, go over technology with folks, remind folks of that they have Zoom backgrounds that can hide the messy house, or not to stress about what they're wearing. Tell them the cameras distort images. No matter how good you look, you're going to probably come across a little blurry and fuzzy anyway. So don't stress about your appearance. Encourage the more introverted folks to just show up at first if they don't feel comfortable speaking up. It can be hard to get kind of that rhythm of when to respond during a Zoom call because it's mediated by multiple screens along the way, wires, cables, and it's hard to have that one-on-one spontaneous conversation until you get used to the speed your internet goes at and someone's speaking rhythm. And help people feel not pressured to perform. And if you use passwords for security, to reassure folks that you're mindful of avoiding Zoom bombers. It's really important. And about games, Paul's going to share an awful lot about games. That's his area of expertise. I'm just kind of touching on them briefly through my discussion. But we've got traditional board games that have gone online, as well as games developed especially for a virtual environment. Games provide a great platform for socializing and entertainment for sure, but researchers have found that online games can be beneficial to us in the work setting as well. Much like team building exercises, playing games with colleagues can help us to develop deeper relationships with them. We get an opportunity to see colleagues as kind of whole people, the entire person, versus just a little bit of identity we see in the workplace. And it helps us to work together on team challenges or enjoy some friendly rivalry with coworkers. And games this magic space where we go and we can lose who we are, and we can, other parts of our identity may pop out. And when you're doing that with coworkers, it really does deepen our bonds with them. And it can build morale, camaraderie, friendships, and connections with our coworkers. So games aren't just for families and friends. They can be used intentionally in workplace settings as well. Learning opportunities abound when it comes to what games can do for us, and what we can do through games. They're help us set goals. They help us plan. There's strategic thinking that we use when we're playing games that requires to think through a few moves ahead of time, or with certain characters in the game, what people can, what isn't allowed by the rules. They also kind of help us deal with frustration, which is really important, dedication and persistence if we're committed to winning the game or finishing the game strongly. And then it helps us teach kids and ourselves how to win and how to lose. Games are used in therapy settings, classrooms, motivating tools for learning. They help with academic learning, social learning, emotional regulation learning, and all these occur through gameplay. And so it's really important when we think of game, it's not just child's play, it's also something, it can be a tool for self-development and the development of members of the family. Gameplay can be therapeutic as well. Sometimes you learn about hidden untapped skills you have, or family members and friends might have that you've never noticed before. Introverts may find their voice more easily in a game. If you're doing role-playing games, you get to take on the role of someone else. And so it gives you kind of a safe space to try out new behaviors. In counseling, we have behavior rehearsal where we encourage clients to try out new ways of communicating, and we do role play. And so games kind of offer that opportunity to try out different aspects of your personality. They help build focus and attention. You can master multitasking through engagement in games, increase mental dexterity. Some games require a lot of quick thinking, and it helps, it builds our brain power. Also, there are games that, that can help fight aging-related cognitive decline, because we're being challenged, we're having to learn new things as we go, or respond quickly to different stimuli. So they're really helpful, and staying engaged in games throughout the lifespan is really important. And expressing multiple aspects of identity not normally visible to others. So it's kind of fun. You can see couples who play a game together, and they'll be surprised at something that might show up in their partner's play, a part of their personality. Or you might see a child wanting to help another child if it's a strategy game. And so you can learn a lot about a person through how they show up in their gameplay. Sometimes you'll learn about hidden untapped skills that you have, or family members and friends might have, that you've never noticed before. Family rivalries can develop in gameplay. Team alliances can be created that bring together family members who might not normally interact much together. You can intentionally create kind of those the teams within a family to kind of help people get to know each other better, or help kind of build conversation when you have folks on the same team. Individual games tend to breed competition, but there are many games that encourage strategic alliances, which can help families learn to communicate better. So games are a great way to practice communication. Benefits of virtual engagement, family and friends and games. Shared goals, common objectives come up when you're playing games. There's a sense of a shared environment, a sense of belonging, and contributing to something besides oneself, which is really important. And the best part about games, positive and pleasant experiences, join those together and you get enjoyment. And that's what games are all about. They challenge you, they give you a chance to show your prowess, but they're all about having fun, ideally. And talking about the sense of belonging and a sense of a shared environment, researchers have looked at binge watching. Like, what happens if a couple binge watches a show? I mean, is this helping the relationship? Is it hindering the relationship? And it turns out that when we go into this binge watch mode with family, with friends, with significant others, we're kind of transporting ourselves to this kind of shared world. It's kind of a fantasy world. But when we go there, we get into the mind space of living in this other space, of getting to know the characters, and they can actually kind of take shape so that a couple has something new to communicate about, they have something they can share, and there's this kind of, they can talk about issues showing up in a television show that maybe they're facing in their own lives, but they're not ready to kind of talk about it in terms of, this is what our problem is, how are we going to fix it? But that couple on TV, they've got an interesting problem going on. What are some things, I wonder what they can do next, or I wonder what they'll do next week to try to work on this. So games too take us to the space where we kind of can step outside our own self and into this other identity, whatever that might be, and share this special space that we might not typically share just through normal interaction. Some more benefits of virtual engagement: meaningful interactions with purpose. That you're not just sitting down to play a game. Your purpose is to win the game, or to align with someone, or to help. There's a meaning to this action. And there's common rules which provide group norms. And that's really good too, because sometimes in life we have, in some families, one parent will have one norm, the other will have other norms for the kids, or we may get some rules in one space in our life and have to deal with others. But when you come to a game, there are group norms that are present. And in counseling, when you're setting up rules for groups, for group counseling, one of the first things you attend to is setting up the group norms, like what's acceptable behavior and what's not. We feel safer when we're in something of a contained environment. And so games are providing that sense of contained environment, the meaning-filled activities, and we're nourishing closeness and cohesion when we're playing as part of the team. And there's, again, that magic circle of shared experience. And we all love immersing ourselves into this idea of this magic space where we're focused on something, kind of like flow, when you lose track of what's going on outside and behind you, and you're more focused on the here and now. And it kind of feeds a part in ourselves where we really like to connect to what's going on, that sense of meaning. And hanging out together is definitely key. It's a huge part of why we enjoy playing games with friends. Being with other people, that social connection is so important. With family and friends and games, it's fun just to enjoy the sheer fun of games. They trigger surprise, challenge, happiness, satisfaction, shared emotions, including shared feelings of anxiety and fear, which are both okay in a safe environment. That's like losing in a game environment, learning how to lose gracefully, learning how not to be a boastful winner. There are a lot of life lessons that we can take from gameplay. They help us practice healthy coping skills and strategies to deal with challenges, risks, and threats. And we also share new experiences in games since they are often unpredictable. And when we're experiencing a novel situation, we tend to bond quickly with those with whom we're sharing the experience, kind of like vacation friends and fellow travelers in life. We can build some really quick, strong relationships with folks who are in a novel situation with us, because novel situations encourage us to build bonds, and it happens in an exciting way that typically isn't matched in everyday interactions. And gameplay can give us that sense of excitement and not knowing what's coming next. So there's a heightened level of engagement that we might get from that. And we also learn new skills too, which builds our confidence, our self-esteem, and our sense of mastery. Family game night around the world. These are just a few of the games that have grown in popularity since the pandemic brought us all back into the house and around the table. From Cards Against Humanity to Werewolf, Jackbox, Monopoly. There's so many ways to bring light and laughter into the coming winter season through the use of games. And I'm going to encourage everyone to try to find new and different games to get outside their comfort zone and try out new ways of engaging with family and friends that you've known for a long time. Games can bring a new spark to the relationship. You're likely to learn something new about yourself, and you'll definitely learn something new about the people with whom you play. And now we're going to turn the podium over to Paul, and he's going to share some of his research and expertise on just what this Renaissance of board games is all about.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Suzanne. That was awesome. And what's great is there's so much crossover with some of the things that I'm going to talk about. So that is super exciting.
I wanted to just thank you, Suzanne, for that. I think we learned a lot from that, certainly about shared goals and experiences. And I think that this time has brought out some skills in us that we didn't know we had. And I heard some real positive things like no sitters, and you don't have to clean your whole house when you're having parties and get-togethers. So you gave us a lot of great suggestions. And Paul, I know that people are just really waiting to hear about all these games.
Well, I'm waiting with bated breath. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm going to open up some slides. It's going to take a second because I've got a lot of images. So while they're loading, I just want to kind of thank Judy and thank Suzanne for Judy for inviting me to do this talk, and Suzanne for her excellent talk. My name is Paul Booth. As was introduced, I'm a professor at DePaul University, and I study board games among many other things. But if you had to take a step back and say, what is it that Paul Booth is actually very interested in? I look at popular culture and how people, everyday people, experience popular culture emotionally. So what is it about popular culture that makes us feel things? What is it about popular culture that makes us experience the world in a new way? And so I just want to start my timer here. Thank you so much for bringing me in here. What I want to talk to you today about is board games specifically, and the kind of popular renaissance of board games. Because while as Suzanne pointed out, board games have always been a popular activity for family and friends and for getting together with people. They are also exploding in popularity, and you would be hard pressed to find people who haven't played or at least heard of some relatively esoteric games that we may not have heard about before. But before I get into that, I want to address something, which is when Judy introduced me, she said Paul Booth is a professor of media and cinema studies, and that may be kind of a weird thing. Why is someone who studies the media talking about board games? These are those kind of dusty things that are sitting up in the closet. And one of the reasons that I am talking about board games and why I find this so fascinating is because although we've traditionally thought of board games as these kind of separate entities, specifically because they're so popular today, and specifically because they're getting so much more complicated and so much deeper and thematic, I actually see board games as a type of media, akin to how we might look at television shows or movies. Board games communicate something to us, and the fact that there are so many new and varied board games today tells us something about the world that we live in. This is all coming out in a book that is coming out in January, which I wrote, called Board Games and Media, and that's where a lot of this research came from. And for that book, I actually surveyed about 1,000 board game players from around the world and interviewed about 100 of them more in depth. And what's fabulous, and what I'll talk about in a little bit, is how much board game players were echoing a lot of what Suzanne was just talking about in terms of the socialization of board games and the importance of board games for therapeutic reasons. So today, what I was going to talk to you about, I'm going to talk a little bit about why board games have gotten so popular and what that popularity means. I'm going to explore some new types of board games, ones that you may not have heard of before, some that you may have heard of before. If like myself, you are an avid board gamer, you will be familiar with most of these games. But I also thought it might be useful for those of you that aren't to get maybe a list of some interesting games that you could check out and explore. And then at the end of the talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about how board games have transitioned in this pandemic world into kind of digital online play. So when you first think about board games, you probably think, oh, Monopoly and Cranium and Battleship and Sorry and all of these games that we've kind of had for 50 or 60 or 70 years that we dust off when it's raining out or it's a boring Sunday, and we gather the clan together to play some games. And that is certainly one of the kind of major elements of board games, the kind of mass market type of board games. But board games themselves have really evolved in the past 20 years. And so while you might be familiar with games like Scrabble or Battleship or Sorry, newer games, and I've got just a couple of images here. On Mars is a new one that just came out, and Gloomhaven came out a couple of years ago, are just these immense complicated, thematic, detailed games that can take hours and hours and hours to play. You might, I think, we're all familiar with Risk taking like 4 days to play. But, if you open up On Mars, when I opened up On Mars and played it, it took about 3 hours to do one game session, which was just one part of a longer story. Gloomhaven I've been playing for 2 years and I still haven't gotten to the end of it. So these are not just these kind of throw them on the table and play for 45 minutes. A lot of the games that have become much more popular today are very immersive. What Suzanne was talking about in terms of binging television and couples getting together to binge television, the same thing is happening with board games, that couples and groups of people and friends and families are getting together and entering into another world, entering into a kind of mythic type of world. And that's one of the reasons why I think board games have become so much like media, so much like the kind of media text that we traditionally study. So just to give you an idea of some of how popular board games have become, this is a survey some statistics that was done by Statistica at the beginning of the year, that the global board game market value has increased, and right in the middle is 2020 to nine. Right now it's $9.27 billion industry, and is projected to only increase in the next couple of years, 10 billion, 11 billion, 12 billion. This is not spare change, right? These are very intense. A lot of money is exchanging hands here. Just to give you an idea, On Mars costs about $150. Gloomhaven costs about the equivalent of that. Although right now I think there's a sale on Amazon, so you can check that out for yourself. It's only 90. Another way to look at the popularity of board games is where board games are coming from. Interestingly enough, Kickstarter and crowdfunding has become so much more of a way for board games to get started, because one person can design a game, and using the funding models of Kickstarter can get an influx of money, which they can then use to buy the products and the parts that go into the game. It can be a solitary or a couple of persons on a team kind of activity. So just to give you some examples here, board games are the #1 category that are of funded projects on Kickstarter, with $176 million worth of successful products have been funded. Successful board games have been funded on Kickstarter. 67, 2/3 of all the board games that are on Kickstarter get funded, and that's over 2,300 board games getting funded a year. There are about 5,000 new board games that get released every year. So it is not a small industry. This is an industry on par, releasing enough products, releasing as many products as, say, Hollywood. We also see that the total number of projects has simply increased. So I said 2,300 have actually been funded. About 4,000 projects, board game projects, are on Kickstarter. And then in an early survey of board gamers, where they surveyed about 500 people, they found that about 10% of people surveyed owned over 100 board games. 22% of the people surveyed spent over $1,000 a year on board games. These are not insignificant numbers, right? This is a very significant hobby. When I was doing my own research and was surveying about 1,000 people, it ended up being about 900 people answered all of these questions. I found out that most board gamers in this survey were aged between 36 and 44, or 35 and 44. And then the second most were millennials, were 20 to 34-year-olds. That this is not like old people playing games, and this is not super young people playing games. This is people college age people. This is young professionals playing games. The board game pastime has overtaken pastimes like going to the bar because of so much of the socialization that happens that really allows board games to flourish. I also found that the majority of board gamers are male, although there is a significant, about a third of board gamers that were in my survey identified as women. And then there were quite a few transgender and gay and non-binary players of board games, which I found out in kind of discussing board games that the kind of high percentage of non-binary people playing games were because board games are such a safe space. You play with a small group of people, people that you feel comfortable with. I also found out that board games are predominantly played by white audiences, which I was kind of surprised at until I dug into the data a little bit more and found out that a lot of this has to do with the amount of leisure time we have. And because board games are becoming a more expensive hobby, it tends to be played by more affluent people, higher social class, and tends to leave behind people that are not as privileged in our culture. But when I looked at how long people have been playing board games, the majority of people that I surveyed have been playing for over 15 years. And if you think about the age range, that means the people that are in that 35 to 44-year-old category, most of them started playing when they were in their 20s. And then the people that are in their 20s, have been playing for 10 years or so. So board games relatively recently have kind of exploded in popularity. So what does this all mean? Why is it important to look at the popularity of board games? Well, in my research, I found a couple of factors that just were echoed across all the people I talked to. First of all, I found that board games are a direct reaction to the increase of digital technology in our lives, which of course seems a little bit funny to be talking on Zoom about board games and how to play board games digitally. But regardless, board games, a lot of the people I interviewed said that board games were so popular because they could put their phones down for a little bit. They didn't have to be on their computer. We're on our computers so much for work. We're on even before the pandemic, on our computers so much for pleasure, for talking to people, for FaceTiming with relatives across the country, that board games allowed us a moment to have analog fun, to just turn off the digital. This gets complicated in a little bit when I talk about the way digital apps have been integrated into games, but the vast majority of people said that they played games to escape digital technology. Another important element of board games that I discovered was that the people that were playing games, this echoes so much with what Suzanne was talking about, is that it involves using our brains in a critical fashion. They challenge us. People like to be challenged. People like to have challenges. I don't know any other way to say it. People like to run up against a problem and try and solve that problem. And games give us an opportunity to do that in a safe way. Nobody likes solving problems when, our job is on the line or our house is falling apart and we have to solve a problem in the moment. But when the problem is on a board and it's fun and you can remove it from the reality of your life, suddenly solving problems can become a fun activity. Suzanne mentioned the idea of flow and the idea that we thrive when our challenge, the challenge level of a task matches our skill level. And games are perfectly tuned to that because games adjust the skill level based on how skilled you are and how experienced you are at a game. I'm kind of blocking this chart in here, but when I interviewed everyone about why they liked playing games, when I interviewed 900 people about why they liked playing games, the vast majority said it was socialization, that they enjoyed meeting other people. In fact, that was about half the people that I interviewed said it was simply about socialization. It was about being with other people, physically being with other people. Strategic thinking was a second most popular category, and then digital technology was fourth. The third category was making friends or deepening friendships with games, which also goes along with the socialization. Interestingly, you can see, and I put this down here at the bottom, that, it's weird to kind of try and point but be backwards. That number 11, it's tactile, was also a really important thing. People liked holding the game. They liked touching the pieces and moving things around. Some of the reasons people said they really enjoyed playing games, it's a good investment. So although, say, On Mars is $150, I played that with 4 people. It took us 3 hours. We'll play it a couple more times at least. That's cheaper than going to a movie. Also breaking away from technology, reconnecting with friends. Some people mentioned that being geeky, being nerdy is more socially acceptable. And indeed, it's not unusual to see people, wearing Marvel t-shirts or Star Trek t-shirts or Star Wars merchandise. So being geeky has become a much more acceptable identity today. And then this other quote, people have become so disconnected from each other, games bring people together. We see this kind of echoed in all of the research. Some other quotes, a little bit longer. Social media, people are more comfortable sharing what they enjoy. And so here's one of the complicated things, right? Board games are analog. People enjoy being analog with the games, but at the same time, they find games and they find people to play games with through social media. So there is a digital component to it. It's just we have to kind of put that aside when we actually play the game. And echoing some of what Suzanne was saying about the therapeutic value of games, a lot of people in my survey talked about the therapeutic value, or how games help them overcome social anxiety. That when you're just talking with someone, let's say you were out at a bar with people or at a restaurant with people, imagine that fantasy at the moment. People who have social anxiety could have some difficulty interacting in those sorts of situations because the socialization is the focus. But a game takes the focus away from the socialization. A game puts the focus on the game, and the socialization just comes along with it. And so it actually, what a lot of the people in my survey said is that games allowed them to feel socialization without getting anxious about it. And then again, people are constantly looking for ways to interact with or without the use of technology. And of course, we can't forget here at the bottom, beating other people. Winning is fun, which was also something that popped up in my survey. So I mentioned at the beginning of the talk what happens if we look at board games as if they're media texts. I'm a media scholar, which means I look at television and film and even books to say, what are these things communicating about the culture that created them? Why was The Wizard of Oz written in 1903? And why did the movie come out in the 1930s? And what was it saying about the culture that those media texts emerged at those particular moments? Why that text at that moment? And board games, I think, because they are so thematic, because they are so complex, because they reward multiple plays, echo a lot of the same themes that we see with media text. So we have a television studies that allows us to have methodologies to study television. We have a film studies that gives us methodologies to study films. We don't have a game media studies. There's a game studies, but that looks at games differently. That looks at games as systems. How do games communicate messages? How do games make us feel? How do games touch us emotionally? This is the sort of work that I'm interested in exploring, and some of the things that I'm going to talk about in the rest of this talk. So one of the things I found out in my book, or for my book rather, talking to these people and running the analyses of games, is that the physical game, the actual game itself, is only half of the game text. And the other half, and the reason perhaps that board games are so difficult for us to study, the other half of that is the interaction that we have with other players. And that is, by definition, unique in every situation. If I sit down to play a game of Ticket to Ride with my family, it's going to be different than if I sit down to play Ticket to Ride with my best friend. We could play the exact same game with the exact same pieces, but that social interaction will change the game itself. And it's different than, say, if we all sat down to watch a movie together. The movie itself stays the same. We can interpret it differently, but the actual experience of it will be the same. Whereas playing a game will actually change the experience because people will move pieces differently, will make different decisions. So one of the reasons games are not studied as media text is because it's really hard to take a particular game session and extrapolate out from that. The second thing, and then this kind of emerges from the first thesis there, is that games don't come into existence without players. I can take a game off of my shelf, but I can't study it as a game. I can only study it as an object. Therefore, you have to be in a session. You have to actually be doing something, which means the researcher in a lot of ways has to participate. I can't just assign my students to watch a game. I have to have them actually play it in order to become part of that game situation. And then the third thesis that I focused on is that board games, like any other media text, reflect aspects of the culture that produced it and reflect player reactions to that culture. So the way that we react to games often tells us a lot about our culture. I'm going to talk about that just as a little spoiler towards the end of the talk about the game Pandemic and how the game Pandemic has changed over the past 6 months, because I think that's pretty instructive about this third point. So what are some of these games? What are some of these genres? What are some of the ways that we can study board games as media? Well, one category of board games is what I'd call serious games. That is, games that approach very serious topics. Here are 3 examples. On the bottom here, there's a game called This War of Mine, which came out in, I believe, 2014. It may be I might be off on my date there, but it's a game about you play as civilians in a kind of war-torn country. You're not fighting, but you are trying to survive and scrounge resources like food and water and medicine while your city is being bombed. And there's a kind of larger narrative here that deals with a lot of the wars that were being fought and are still being fought, and how that affects civilians. At the end of This War of Mine, you win if your players have, if your characters have not gone insane from mental instability, from stress, basically. Another game, Holding On, The Troubled Life of Billy Kerr, is about a man who is rushed to a hospital and having a heart attack, and the nurses are attempting to get him to tell his life story so he can exorcise some of his demons. He can communicate some of the issues he's had in life so he can die untroubled by his past. You wouldn't normally think that a game about war and trying to survive as civilians and a game about helping someone pass away peacefully would be really fun board games, but they are, and they also tell us really important stories. I remember when I was researching the book and playing This War of Mine with my friends, after the game was done, we all sat around and had a conversation about how it made us feel, unprompted. I wasn't asking us to do that. It was simply a way to communicate this. The third game I have up here, Evolution Climate, is a game about climate change and how climate change affects animals and the environment. Again, obviously having a very particular serious point, but gamifying it so that it becomes a little bit easier for us to talk about it. Another category of games that is particularly popular right now are cooperative games, and I think that's instructive about what's happening in our culture. That is, we are finding, as we are becoming much more isolated, as we are locking down and quarantining and being just with our individual pods of people, that it takes cooperation in order for anything to happen. If I run to the grocery store, I might pick up groceries for my elderly neighbors so that they don't have to go to the grocery store and risk getting COVID. So we're finding a lot more cooperative games echoing a kind of more cooperative feeling amongst at least some people in our culture. A couple of games that do this, Betrayal at House on the Hill is actually an older game. It came out in the early 2000s, but it plays like a horror movie. Where a group of players enters a haunted house and then various scary things happen, and it can be a really fun game to play certainly it was fun to play on Halloween, but it can be a fun game to play because it has a very strong narrative element to it. Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective doesn't even have a board. You play as a gumshoe who is attempting to solve a mystery, and all you have is about a 100-page book of different interviews that you can do with people, and you have to figure out who to interview and take their stories and figure out the clues and then compare your score to Sherlock Holmes at the end. It's a very challenging game. I don't know if I've ever won. I don't know well, I do know someone who has beaten Sherlock Holmes once, but it is a very fun game because it involves, and it's very cooperative. All of you together are discussing this case, again, very story oriented. And then I mentioned earlier Pandemic as an exemplar game of the moment. Pandemic, you have to work together to cure diseases that are ravaging the world, and you can't do it by yourself because every character in the game has a special ability, and if you use your special ability, you're able to kind of leverage the character in order to cure these diseases. That Pandemic has actually increased in sales exponentially during COVID, I think, as a way for people to kind of work through a lot of the anxiety that they may be feeling today about the pandemic that is raging outside of our walls. Another type of game that's become very popular over the past 5 years or so are what's called legacy games, or sometimes they're called campaign games. And these are games that don't end after your play session. So if you play a game of, say, Risk Legacy, if you played a traditional game of Risk, the game ends when one player has taken over the world. Risk Legacy ends at a certain point, and the world has changed. Maybe one of the countries has been destroyed and no longer is inhabitable. And then the next time you play the game, you start from that new state, and so you play the game, I think it's 12 or 13 times. And each time the choices you made in earlier games affect what happens to your game as you develop and as you go through it. So it actually becomes a story that you play together. There are lots of new legacy games. They're great for families because you can set it up and have one game go and then come back to it a couple of days later, play another session. The game is different because the choices you made in the past affected your choices in the present and will affect your choices in the future. I'm running a little bit out of time, so I'm just going to kind of speed through the last couple of these, mentioning some important games that might be useful and might be fun in this kind of socially distant era. Escape room games have become also very popular. Escape rooms themselves, you may know, where you go to other locations, you go to say storefronts or malls, and within an hour, you and your team solve a bunch of mysteries, solve a bunch of puzzles, and get out of a locked room. That has been translated into kind of board game form. You've got exit games, unlock games, escape room, the game. There's a lot of different varieties of these. And these are fabulous games for families to play because they're puzzle solving, and the puzzles are at different levels so that young kids can play and solve some easier puzzles. Adults can play and solve more complicated puzzles. And at the end of the game, you feel this amazing sense of elation when all the puzzles have come together and you've solved the room, you've escaped, you've gotten out. One disadvantage of these games is that they're one and done. So once you have played an exit game or once you've played an unlock game, that's it. You can't play it again because you already know all of the clues. But they're also not particularly expensive. $12, $15 for 2 hours worth of entertainment is a pretty good deal. You can also play, especially unlock games, you can play online because all it takes is cards and an app for your phone. And with one player controlling the app, you can kind of solve problems using Zoom, holding cards up to the camera there. Another kind of category that is particularly, I think, instructive right now are what's called gateway games. These are games that experienced gamers can use to introduce people who have not played very many board games to the world of board gaming. So you may be familiar with Catan. It's probably the most popular board game certainly most popular hobby board game that's out there, where you're playing settlers on an island, building building up resources to make cities and roads. And it's a wonderful game to introduce to people who have never played. It's a great game if you're a fan of like Monopoly. It's a great transition. Ticket to Ride, I've mentioned before, is another great game that is easy to learn, but a little bit more thematic and a little bit more complex, where you're building railroads across the country. And a new game that I really like and I've introduced to a bunch of people is Sagrada, where you're making stained glass windows using colorful dice, and you have to obey different rules to get the dice to line up. But all of these games take 45 minutes or so, and there are digital versions of all of these games as well, so you can actually play them over apps with friends and family if you both have accounts with the different services. And that kind of brings me to my last point, which is linking board games to the digital environment. Earlier, I said a lot of people play board games to escape the digital world, to escape our reliance on computers and phones. And of course, that is still a really important part of board gaming. But board games have evolved and developed just like our culture has, and now just like we do, some of them rely on apps or rely on computer programs. So I have just some pictures of games up here. One of them I want to point out is the game Detective, which is actually a fabulous game to play over Zoom or FaceTime, because each of you play different characters in like a crime scene, and you have 5 different cases, but they're all linked. And as you solve them, you kind of unlock this larger mystery, and you don't have to be in person to play it. You can just open up a FaceTime call, because all of the information is just read from a small book or from a website that you can share. So it's a wonderful game to play over the internet. Another game, it's only for 2 players, but another game that works really well online is Patchwork, where you build a quilt. This is a competitive game where you and versus another player are trying to build the most complete quilt. It is, I can attest, one of the most relaxing games you will ever play, and certainly a wonderful time. So what are some ways you can play board games online? Usually using Zoom or using a phone to chat. There's some services. Tabletopia is a website where they have board games online, and you can create accounts and log in. I believe it costs a little bit of money, but you can download full 3D renders of board games and play them over the internet with people. Tabletop Simulator is a little bit more complicated to get involved. It's free, Tabletop Simulator costs some money, but all the games on it are free. Varying qualities because they're all user generated, but you can easily get online, chat with someone over the phone, or even over Zoom, and just close the Zoom window and use the audio. And then Suzanne mentioned this as well, but Jackbox games, where's my pointer finger? Jackbox games are very popular right now. They're very, very short internet games that are usually very funny, very, very humorous. So just to kind of conclude, as we are living in this pandemic world and we are, by ourselves or in these small clusters of people, it is harder and harder to reach out to friends to play board games. But the types of board games that have developed recently, these complex thematic board games, these board games that are like media texts, are becoming much easier to play online because the digital environment has created so many new avenues for us to reach out to other people. Board games, and I'm just going to conclude with basically what Suzanne concluded. They allow greater socialization. They allow greater strategic thinking, cooperation and interaction. Analog games, they bring back the joy of being in person or the tactility of games. They're new challenges, and we thrive when we get challenged at our skill level. And they become new ways of looking at media, not as a screen, but as something that is communicating something important about our culture. So I will end there. Thank you very much for everyone for listening. I'm really excited to talk more about this, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.
Thank you, Suzanne and Paul. I found it very fascinating. I particularly thought it was great that we're talking about fun. We're wanting to have fun here, and I think both of you talked about that. People like challenges in a safe way. I thought that was really went with both of your talks. And Paul, I was just fascinated by your talk about gamifying some of these really important concepts. I thought that was very interesting. Anyway, I'm sure that our audience has some conversation and some questions and comments. And so we're going to give our audience just a few minutes to type in some comments or some questions in the Q&A. So in the meantime, I do want to share with you that our next STEM Cafe is going to be on the supply chain. How will your holiday gifts get to your door? So that is going to be our conversation on December 16th and 6 p.m. So I think everybody will be very interested in a talk about the supply chain puzzle.
Judy, I'm sorry, I see a question in the chat here about have either of us used games in the classroom virtually and what the learning outcomes and reactions were. Suzanne, have you used games in the classroom?
Well, I've done it as kind of an icebreaker activity before a class in the internet environment as a way to kind of connect with folks, but not in the classroom as a regular ongoing thing, other than sometimes Jeopardy as a way to test knowledge, where we had the Jeopardy game, but it's more kind of, and that's a skills-based training game.
I haven't used virtual board games in my classroom, but I have taught a class on board games where the students kind of got together and played games together, and we talked about a lot of the issues that I brought up, and that's worked well. Trisha, yeah, so the free gaming platform, I was kind of rushing at the end there, so I'm sorry that I got a little turned around and confused. Tabletopia is free to use, but a lot of the games will cost money to buy. Tabletop Simulator costs money, but the games are free. So it's just a very confusing kind of situation. Those are the two that I know best, but there may be other ones out there that I'm unfamiliar with.
Although they're not gaming, there's some things that are free that are kind of freeware that allow you to play different games. Not so much the branded games, but creative ways, like I said, scavenger hunts, categories, Pictionary. There are things that are available if you do searches online. You can get to freeware for those if you want to just try it out and see how it goes with friends and family before investing a significant amount or insignificant amount.
A lot of the board game apps are relatively inexpensive, $3 or $4. So it's not, it's something, but it's not a huge expense.
Yeah. I know Jackbox, I think things like that are $24, $29. And then there's several games that come in it, and you pay it once, and then you can have as many people play as you want. I think,
yeah.
I don't know, hundreds can play some of those games.
Darren, how can we increase board gaming to people who are less wealthy in our culture, as these games are clearly beneficial? Yeah, that was a major question that I had in writing the book, because I did not expect to find such a skewed diversity of gamers like that. You know, and I asked a lot of gamers about this, and one of the issues is in the board game industry is still predominantly white and predominantly male and predominantly, you know, making games with lots and lots of miniatures. Like the Zoom background I have behind me is Gloomhaven. It's 22 pounds. The box was 22 pounds when it was delivered. You know, that's just a lot of stuff. And we don't always need that stuff. I like that stuff, but like I don't necessarily need it. So I think trimming the fat a little bit and having more people with diverse backgrounds in the industry will certainly kind of begin to make a change.
I know there are, you know, cafes and coffee shops, bars where where you can try out the games, where there are games available. And sometimes that's a nice way to kind of figure out if it's worth the investment. And they are, you know, and some libraries now have nice, decent gaming libraries. But of course, with the pandemic, things have changed significantly right now. But I think there have been efforts made to share and get people involved.
Mm-hmm. I think my local library has done virtual board game nights.
Night,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, I'm seeing some, oh, thousands of games. Have you counted games of destruction as opposed to games that build up or require cooperation? That's a really interesting question, Jack. Uh, I haven't counted differences between games like that. I've seen more cooperative games recently, but I think there's still a big market for smash 'em up type games. Trisha, the game behind me is Gloomhaven. Um, Monique has a question, Suzanne. I don't know if that would be one that you could answer. Games teach so many tangible skills. How can we introduce those to K through 12 teachers and also add to College of Ed students pursuing teacher certification?
Well, Monique, I think a lot of teachers had to learn how to digitally engage their students early on, and having icebreakers with their students, whether it's a scavenger hunt, whether it's some kind of guessing game or Pictionary. So I think the pandemic has encouraged a lot of folks to get more creative in the classroom. And I think maybe having, workshops such as this for pre-service teachers, helping them understand the benefits of it. We address it in therapy. There are often games that are used because if you're working with a child with anger issues, playing Connect Four or checkers, games where as a therapist can kind of figure out how the game is going to turn out, we can use that information and help teach the child new skills. And I think teachers too are much more interested in socio-emotional learning as we realize how important that is to success in school and in life. And I think that's something maybe we could have more exposure to them as they're going through pre-service teaching experiences. Thanks for bringing that up. Just like sports are so important. It's another way of games that are competitive and team oriented. I think we need to help kids practice that more because it seems like kids do grow up in a different kind of lifestyle than we did when we were younger. Whatever we might be, whether we're 40, 50, 30, 20, kids are different now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the pandemic will have changed a lot of things right now.
I see a comment on here from NIU STEAM. NIU STEAM, which is the group that I work with, is willing to work with teachers who want to gamify their content. And so if somebody specifically has some content that they would like us to work with them on, if they could email me, I would be happy to get it to the right people so that we could help them gamify any of their content.
Amy Joe has asked, are there games that help even the playing field between more talented players or less talented players? Yeah, most of the games will have some sort of mechanism where more experienced players can be handicapped a little bit. But I mean, some games don't. It's like anything, some games are more challenging. Catan, Catan doesn't have that sort of mechanism, so it's easy for an experienced player to just wipe the floor with a less experienced player. But there are some games. I hate to keep bringing up Gloomhaven, but it's the one that is behind me. Has You could play at different levels, so one player could play on novice and one player could play on hard, just to kind of even it up a little bit. I think as games have gotten a little bit more complicated and a little bit more developed, they're recognizing that there's a need to bring new people in new ways.
Paul, are you going down the Q&A questions here? Do you want to move it?
I'm looking at them. Yep, and I see one that came in from Deborah Booth. Good to see you, Mom. Could, could you both predict how you think the pandemic will impact the culture in the long run, particularly gaming? Suzanne, you want to tackle that one first?
Well, I think we're seeing the reactions now. I think that humans, we've lived this long because we've learned how to react and respond to crises, to natural disasters. I think that humans, we are amazingly malleable and trainable, educable. And I think that what it's doing is, I think, one, we value social connections much more than we knew we did. When we suddenly had limits on how much time we could spend face to face with the people we care about or with people we want to get to know, it taught us just how important social relationships were. I think it's taught us too how to keep these relationships going strong in creative ways that we didn't have to rely on before. And I think as far as gaming and things like that, we need to be entertained. And if we're not going to go to a bar, if we're not going to go out to restaurants, having games, having something to distract us. I mean, games, the flow that Paul mentioned, we get engaged in it and we kind of lose, worries about the bigger world because we're so intent on what's going on here and now. And I think the fact games are unpredictable. I mean, that's part of what we've learned about life is unpredictable. And in a way, gaming helps us be okay with that and learn how to respond to frustrations, challenges, or unexpected risks that we need to take.
Yeah, I think that's a great response. The games give us a chance to experience failure, as Suzanne was saying in her talk, and learn from failure and learn how to fail. And if nothing else, that has prepared us for the kind of failure in a lot of ways that the pandemic is giving us as well.
I think that there are some comments over there in the chat. Did you see that?
Oh.
You might want to.
Yeah, let me flip through that. Games, so going back a ways, sorry that we missed this. We were looking at the Q&A. Oh, there's some more in the Q&A as well. Oh, we got so many more coming in. What would you recommend for ages 8 to 12 to play via Zoom? That's difficult for me to answer. I don't know kids super well, but there are, lots of kind of interactive, fun little things that you can play, apps and things. Suzanne, do you have?
I was gonna say apps and things, and also a lot of the games that are online platforms like Jackbox or House Party, they have versions for kids. They could be family friendly versions, and some of these are kind of quick thinking and they engage you, and so it's easy to do that. Then there's some other if you go online and look up virtual virtual games or online games freeware, you can find them, and you can find some that are suited for those tweenagers and then teenagers. And like I said, the sophisticated game manufacturers create different versions so that people of all ages could engage in them, and there doesn't have to be an M rating on them or a teen rating on them.
And I think playing games with kids is a great social bonding experience, but it also models for kids how good sportsmanship, good gamemanship. Like it can be a way to show kids how to play, and how to lose and how to win and how to be good sports about things. We're getting all sorts of questions. You shared how games sharpen skills at all ages and can reduce anxiety. Are you aware if games help identify red flags for health challenges like learning disabilities?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I say absolutely, because some of the things, rolling dice, can the child count? Are the numbers, making sense? I mean, some of these things are those physical challenges. Hearing, the Simon Says game, the thing you pass back and forth. I mean, is that what it is? Bob, what is it called? Bob, whatever, I can't recall the name. But there's some of these things that are really great because they help you, for young kids, they clue you in if they're able to hear well, if they're able to recognize numbers and letters. So there are some games that really do work well with kids to help diagnose or be concerned, if not diagnose, but to be aware there might be some challenges going on.
Neil, for me, are you familiar with the Churchill game? I'm not familiar with the Churchill game by Mark Herman. So I'll look into it though. Thanks for the recommendation. Sorry, go ahead, Judy.
I'm going to let you control that chat because I don't know if we can both be moving it. So.
Well, sure. So Janet's asked, other than computers, what other devices could we use to connect to games? If you have a smartphone or an iPad, those are great. iPads are actually really great because they're very portable but have the kind of flexibility and computing power that a traditional computer would have. And apps are very easy to download.
Too easy if you have children who get hold of your phone and don't have good password protection.
Thank you all so much for these great questions. One of the things that maybe we could talk a little bit about is using games in education, because I think that's also right now is a little bit more difficult because we are online and we're finding ways to do games online, but games are wonderful education tools. I found when I taught my board game class, um, the students became their projects that they ended up working on were so much stronger because of all the other things they learned playing games, the social skills, the strategic thinking that we were talking about. That even just throwing a game in a class allows that class to bond in a way that I don't know if anything else has done.
I think there were a few more on the chat.
Well, one of them, is there going to be a way to send resources, Judy?
I didn't see what the question was.
Are you able to send follow-up information listing some of these games, sites, and resources? I can't because I don't have any of your information, but Judy
Well,
may.
I certainly can. If you, I can find out what it is that they want, and I can reach out to you if you don't mind sharing. I think that they would really enjoy some of the resources that you have, and it was hard. I was trying to take notes, and there was tons of things that we might want to take from here, from both of you. But remember too that in a week we will have this recorded. But anything that you would like us to get from these two speakers, if you email me, I'd be happy to seek out that information and get it to you. So, and I do see your emails if you put in your email, but you all have my email. So certainly reach out to me, and if you have any resources that you absolutely would like.
Yeah, and actually, I'm putting my email in the chat, and of course, you're happy to answer any questions or offer recommendations or anything if you want to reach out. Happy to stay in touch. Neil, thank you. I was not seeking to recommend the Churchill game, just mentioning it as a game focused mainly on strategy and wondering how much those have been able to translate in the online world without a lot of bling effects and the like. Yeah, when you distill a game down to its basic components, it's it's mathematics, right? It's a probability and a chance and human interaction and human error and human choice, and strategy. That's the strategy, right? Is how much do you figure out about the game and how much do you uh, um, how much do you put into the game in order to get something out of it. That's easily translatable online. All the bling, all the fun stuff, all the miniatures, right? That's window dressing, and that's can be really fun, right? Like there's a reason Gloomhaven is sitting in my table right now, because it's so much fun to have all those pieces and things and little miniatures that you can play with. Everyone loves dolls, so that's a great part of it, but it's all just extra, right? When you break a game down, it can be just mathematics. And that's what I think is so interesting, because all that extra stuff, that's the media. That's what's creating the meaning. That's what's creating the content. I could sit down and do math puzzles, but that's boring. Instead, I play Gloomhaven, where I'm doing all of these math puzzles that are translated into this epic story of good and evil, right, in this fantasy world. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, but yeah, that translates online, and it's just how you want to dress it up can make a difference.
I don't know if did you answer the question about the senior living question?
Sorry, I didn't.
From Jan Miller.
Wanting to connect to those in senior living who are separated physically from the outside. Fun games like Rummy, Canasta, Uno, and more basic games, social interactions. Well, yeah, that's a great way to do that. What was the question? Oh, I'm sorry. Later, more recent. Need ideas of games to connect with seniors. Yeah, I would. Suzanne, do you have any recommendations?
I'm a little. Could you clarify I mean, connecting with seniors, Zoom calls, drive-by visits, online games are one thing you can do. I mean, are you talking about connecting with folks who are there? And because Zoom call, virtual connections are usually the best way to connect, because you can see everyone, and seniors who are in a senior living center can see their family all together. And with seniors, there's research that reminiscence therapy can be really effective, helping folks kind of connect. And if you're worried about them being disengaged, playing, asking them to choose songs from when they were younger, or finding materials to send with them and share, to look through. Photographs, sending them photographs is a great way to do it, to connect with them. Or if they've got photos they've left with you from when they were, before they moved to the center, you could bring the photo albums to flip through with them, or do it virtually. So finding ways for them to connect with earlier aspects of their life can really help seniors feel connected to the here and now.
I'm going to go back over here to the Q&A. Did we answer this one? How do you get someone who is very focused on winning and very competitive to enjoy a new strategy game that they would eventually enjoy? Because there are some people that are so competitive that they almost stress themselves out over it.
Suzanne, do you have ideas about that? Take a stab at that one.
Yeah. As a counselor, I know that no one's going to change unless they want to change. And the reason people do change is based on two reasons. Either they have no relationships or they have poor relationships. So if it's someone you care a lot about, and they're resisting playing with you, or they don't want to spend time on this new game, asking them to do it, just to take a chance to, just to give it a try. And a lot of us have a hard time imagining we're going to enjoy something until we're immersed in it. And suddenly we realize, we really like coconut ice cream. We really like pistachios. And so asking them just to give it a try. And if it's someone you care about, if someone, whether it's family, whether it's a friend, just encouraging them to get involved and engaged. And again, you can't force someone else to do what you want them to do. But if you can, say, play this new game, and then I'll play whatever it is you enjoy most next time, and kind of taking turns trading off. And in relationships, we learn we have to play some of the games we don't enjoy because we want time to play the games we do enjoy. So gameplay with folks we care about is often just a series of trade-offs and asking people to take a chance. I don't have if I had a magic cure for getting people to enjoy what I want them to enjoy, I think the world would be a different place.
Did you answer the question about other than computers, what other devices could one use? Did you? You're muted, Paul.
Did you ask the question about where's the best place to buy board games? I
Yeah, I
don't
don't
have
think
an
we
answer
answered
for
that question.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, I'm there. I must have accidentally hit a button. I apologize. Um, best place to buy board games. Well, I mean, there are so many board game stores that are suffering right now because of the pandemic. I would venture to say that there's one close to you, pretty much no matter where you are. I know in DeKalb there's the Gaming Goat, which is downtown. And if you are in the Chicago area, there's 3 or 4 board game stores. But if you're not venturing out and you just want to order, uh, I hate to recommend Amazon, but it does have everything, and so you can always buy things on Amazon. But I would always go to my local board game store, also because they'll be able to recommend a game that, if you go in and say, hey, I'm looking for a game to play with seniors, I'm looking for a game to play with 8 to 12 year olds, they'll know, they'll have a good recommendation. Bill asks, are there games available for large groups, 20 to 40 people to play? Yeah, there are some. I've played a couple with some classes. So I had a picture up of Werewolf, which is a great game, social deduction game, where 2 of you are hidden werewolves and everyone else are villagers, and you have to try and guess who's the werewolves before the werewolves eat everyone. That always has classes in hysterics. But there's another game that I really like called Two Rooms and a Boom. I don't know if you've heard of that one, Suzanne, where everyone has a different role. The president, a doctor, a robot. I mean, there's 300 roles that you can play, and you're in 2 different rooms, in 2 teams. It can be as many number of people as you want, up to like 200, and you just have to swap people back and forth in 3 rounds. And if at the end of the game, the president is in the same room as the bomber, one team wins, and if they're in different rooms, the other team wins. So it is another social deduction game, but you get to play a role, so you actually like take on the characteristics and talk about things. It's really, really fun. Oh, Roz played that game. Excellent. Yeah. Um, I once had that. I was going to do it in class, as a 15-minute activity, just like a social building thing. It ended up taking 45 minutes because the students were so enjoying themselves, and I couldn't bring myself to stop it because it was so much fun.
Did you answer that question about Wingspan and the engine building games?
I did
It,
not.
it's
I
in the
didn't see
chat.
that. Judy,
Mary, Mary asked that question. It's back up there around
oh yeah, I
7:30.
see. Looking at how we can play these games online. Yeah, Wingspan certainly has an online. You can buy a version of Wingspan online. I think it's like $20 or something, and then you can play it socially. You can all log in and play Wingspan. I'm not sure. Maybe Viticulture is maybe what you're thinking with the Vintner. I'm not sure if that has a digital version, but there's a version of it on Tabletopia. So if you both got Tabletopia, you could play it on that as well. Basically, any game you're thinking, any game you play, there's going to be a digital version of it somewhere. It's just a question of how much do you want to dig, and how much do you want to spend. Wingspan is a fabulous game to play with people.
I think she had some other comments there about her son painting game pieces, and he's looking at how we can play these games online. I think you answered that. And
I do see a question way back, Janet. Sorry, we missed this one. Is there an influence of gaming to gambling addiction? That's a great question. Suzanne, do you have any thoughts on that? You're muted, by the way.
I apologize. I have a dog barking in my house. No, regarding, gaming, going to gambling, if someone has a tendency to addiction, then that gaming could potentially lead to gambling. But it really is the individuals. It's not like I play, people can get addicted to gaming, but it doesn't mean they're going to go out and gamble away their money. It just means there's no research I've seen that playing games leads to gambling. Except addictive personalities, you can be addicted to anything and everything, process addictions. But I've seen no research as of yet saying just gaming is a predictor of later serious addiction issues to gambling or whatnot.
The rest of that question from Mary is something about Tussie Mussy. Did you ever hear of that game?
I've heard. I haven't played Tussie Mussy, but I've heard of it.
Okay. There was a question a second ago, but now it disappeared.
Yeah. So Darren asked if there was an online Axis and Allies game, and I typed in a website, axisandalliesonline.com, but when I sent it, made the question disappear. So my apologies. I can put that in the chat as well. Yeah, there's an online version.
I apologize to our audience. This is the first time that I've done this. We switched to Zoom because we thought it was easier for our audience, but Judy's still learning here.
These are great questions. Thank you so much.
I hope we answered all those 16 questions. You suppose we did?
Paul did a great job keeping up with the questions. He is excellent.
I've been using Zoom to teach for almost a year now, so I've gotten very used to being able to read 3 different screens at the same time.
Amazingly skillful. I've not got that yet. That skill.
Well, it's not a talent I thought I would ever develop, but yeah. Thank you, Darren.
That's my son, and if anybody has a game, it's him. I mean, I don't even want to know how much he spent on them, but I do think your comment about it is cheaper than spending time in bars, and it does have a lot of great socialization skills, and I think it has great potential for using the mind and the challenges, and I think there's definitely a lot of good.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, so I did put up a book called Gameplay, which I wrote a couple of years ago. That's about board games that are based on they're based on media tech. So like games based on TV shows, games based on movies, and how they are communicating what the TV show or the movie is trying to communicate. So that's actually what got me into board games. I was playing the Battlestar Galactica game, which I'm sure you've played if you are a gamer. And as I was watching the Battlestar Galactica TV show, and I was like, this is like, I had this transformational moment where I was like, I'm playing the TV show that I'm watching and I'm learning about both of them at the same time. And then I just started playing a ton of TV show based board games. And I'm very thankful that I'm at a university that says, oh, you want to research that? Go ahead. So it was wonderful.
Well, I have a comment. I don't remember who asked the question, but about having a variety of games is great, because when we go to my son's house, some of the games are more simple and that we can just learn and just have fun, and it's not so intense. So sometimes we play those depending on our time frame, and then other times we play the ones that take longer and are more strategy type games. But it's nice to have a mix depending on who the audience is or who comes to visit, if it's grandma or whoever it is, and so that they don't feel so intimidated. And I think that people can move from the simpler games to the more complicated games, so it can be a progression rather than overwhelming some people who feel like they're not gaming persons until they really get into it and get relaxed. So that's just, I think having a nice variety, especially if
Yeah.
you're doing it with family, is good.
Yeah, I agree. I've found that as I've been playing more and more games with people, if I ever go over to someone's house or they came over to my house, we'd all be carrying bags, like 3 bags full of board games that were all, this one's going to take you 4 hours and this one's going to take you 40 minutes. And so you space it out kind of like a meal, we're going to have a little appetizer game and then we're going to have the main course. And then, so it is fun to thematically link things like that. There are so many out there. I mean, 5,000 games a year is just, you can't keep up.
Well, it's terrible how mothers sometimes embarrass their kids, but I think it's fun that you're saying that you bring these or take these bags to people's houses and you have the games and you bring that. Well, my son brings a laundry basket full of games every time he comes.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
so we don't necessarily play all of them, but we always have a lot of choices. So
Mm-hmm.
I think, people look forward to people like you coming to their house and bringing all the toys and the tools. Of course, right now we have to be careful about visiting other people, but we'll get through this. Uh, so do we see any more comments from anybody? The nice thing about this is that we are recording this, and so you will have an opportunity to go back and listen to some of this, because I think there were a lot of really good suggestions here. And I was taking copious notes, so I'm sure that somebody else is wanting some of this information. But a couple of the things, I thought it was great that you said that some of them, help socialization. Some are great for strategy thinking. Some are just great for having friends. And I think it's wonderful, especially for these age groups that you're saying are the main people that are using them, that it is cheaper
Mm-hmm.
to play games together, and it makes for great conversation. And I think it's a lot cheaper than, getting babysitters and getting and going to the bar and spending a lot of money. And I think it's a lot more fun.
Yeah.
So I think that they really serve a purpose. They certainly bring people together, and it is true that winning is fun. I liked how both of you talked about the fun part of it. And you mentioned Ticket to Ride. Did I get that right?
Yeah. Ticket to Ride's a great
A lot of
game.
people really like that game.
It's sold somewhere like 10 million copies or something.
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary success story.
I think it's fascinating that you talked about the different types of games, like the legacy games are the ones that really tell stories, and the ones that really are ones that can help us get through difficult times.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
some of them that really have themes around big concepts that we need to explore together. And it's interesting that one game that you were talking about, the only way you can get to the end or solve it is to work together.
Yeah.
And so, I think that is very fascinating. But here I'm not giving other people a chance to talk and say anything. But what else did I say here? I can see there were a couple games that you had that are already made that I thought that it worked with some of the concepts that we were working with teachers that they were teaching in school. There was one that was a strategy game that we'll have to take a look at it. I mean, because it's already made, and it sounded like it really fit with some of the field trips that our teachers have.
There's it's interesting you mentioned that. There's everyone knows Catan, or most everyone knows Catan as a very successful game. One of the things that the creators of Catan did was they basically said anyone that can make their own expansion to this, they can create their own version and put it online, as long as they're not trying to make money from it, we don't really care. And so there have been versions of Catan that have tried to teach people things. One of the ones that I really like is Catan Global Warming, I think it's called, where one of the reasons they added a resource of oil, and every time you get oil, you have to raise a CO2 meter, and if the CO2 meter ever gets too high, then the island sinks, and it adds this extra layer that is, you know, attempting to teach people this, or play, not just play through. The idea of climate change and the reality of what that does to our environment, and it's fascinating how people use games like that in educational ways.
I think that was one of them that I thought was particularly interesting and educators could use. I can't remember if there were, and the fact that you said it's really an investment. I mean, there are lots of other activities that we can do that we go out and we spend money on, and then all of a sudden that's gone. But this is something that grows and can be used. So it might be expensive, as you said. The one game was $900 or something, but it still can be used multiple times. I hope my son wasn't listening to that, because I don't want him spending $900 on a game. But I don't know. Do you have any final comments? I think this was great. I just love this. I think there's lots of potential here that both of you talked about for bringing us together during the holidays and doing it in a safe manner. And also we found all the really good reasons to use it. I just thought of my question. What about the mind? What kind of a mind is able to make up these games? I think that's fascinating. I mean, we all have very special skills, but I think it takes a certain kind of a mind to develop these games, and I'm fascinated by that.
Takes an engineer, basically. It's kind of engineering the game and thinking through it and planning for eventualities. I'd have to ask Paul, have you created a game or in addition to Catan? Or...
I haven't, you know, you're not the first person to have asked me that. And you know, I love playing games. I don't think I could design one. That's not the way my brain works. In the same way I love watching TV, but it would be really tough for me to like write a script. It just, you know, I'm always amazed at the complexity of games. My best friend designs games though, and I will often play test with him and he's got a game in development and we'll play a couple of times and I'll offer some feedback. I'm really good at feedback.
Spoken like a true professor.
That's right.
Okay, so I think we're going to close here by me talking about a couple of these slides before it's too late. But before I do that, I would like you to each kind of say what your takeaway is. What would you like people to take away from this talk?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, no, what I'd like people to realize is that interacting with folks is just so very important. Games are a great way to kind of create this other environment, this other connection, and allows you to show pieces of yourself you might not normally show. It lets you see pieces of other people that they typically don't show, maybe in the work environment, the school environment, or even in the home. And so now that we've had so much time to spend together, if you're getting on each other's nerves, if you just need a way to get away from the everydayness of life, I play a game, find a game to play, because it really does take you somewhere else and build connections in great creative ways.
I would echo that. I mean, just games are a great way of building socialization. But I'll also add, just like any sort of piece of popular culture, anything that's been created and designed by human beings, games have deeper meanings to them. And they often communicate things that we don't necessarily even recognize in the moment. So while you're playing games, think about what that game is trying to teach you. Think about what that game is trying to have you do and have you develop and have you learn. That's what I would say.
I'm going to share my screen. I don't know for sure if people can see this, but because there's just a couple of things that I want people to see before we leave them. Let's hope I clicked on the right thing here. Can everybody see this, my screen, or no?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, so I just want to share with everybody about the next STEM Cafe, which is Supply Chain Puzzle. And I think people will be very fascinated by it because she's going to be, our speaker is Christian Nugent from she's a professor in the Industrial and Systems Engineering Department at NIU. She's going to take a closer look at the supply chain. We're going to learn in our global economic system components of a single product and how that single product can come from thousands of miles and all the different people that touch it and to make it happen so that it arrives at your door, and exactly what happened during the pandemic. How couldn't we get certain supplies? How does that really work? And have we learned anything about supply chain through these times? Anyway, she's going to be focusing on all of these kinds of things too, so that we can see how our holiday gifts actually get to our door. And then I do want to say that we do have teen STEM cafes, and if anybody has a teen that is interested in getting involved with us, either email me or contact the DeKalb Public Library, because we want to get our teens engaged. And by the way, that STEM Cafe, the next one is December 16th. And we really welcome your feedback. So if you would please send me an email about some suggestions you might have for future STEM cafes or something that we can improve on. And please forgive us for some of our mistakes that we made this evening, because we are learning and trying to make it as the best we can for you. Remember that, and my speakers really know what they were doing with this. It was me that was a little rusty here. But also know that this is recorded, and so you can get that by going online to the NIU website and putting in STEM cafes, and it will be very clear. If you know anybody that is willing to contribute or fund our STEM cafes, please connect them with me, because we do want to keep this free for everyone, and we really do need partners to help us out with that. So we also want to thank Aline Click's team. I saw that Becky Griffith was in the background as well, so I'm wanting to thank Aline Click, our NIU Director of Web Media and E-Learning, and her staff, Raz Abdul Sorani and Becky Griffith, for assisting us with the Zoom platform this evening. We could not have been here without them. And we thank you, our audience, for joining us. Please come back, and we hope that you will attend again in the future. We hope that we see you on December 16th, and that you stay safe and follow the rules, because we want you to stay with us. And we want to have very safe holidays, but we want to have fun doing it. And so I am so grateful to our two speakers this evening, who certainly brought some really good ideas to us about how we can safely have fun during the holidays. And we certainly will share any resources that we can provide. So if there's something that you're missing and you need, please email me, jdymond@niu.edu, and I'd be more than happy to connect with our speakers and see if they have any connections to anything that you need. And remember that NIU STEAM will work with teachers and educators of all kinds to try to gamify concepts. That is what we like to do, and we have some very talented persons on our team. So I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And
Judy,
I have a question about when will registration open. I think it might open tomorrow, within the next couple of days for sure, for the next Cafe. I think it looked like everything is ready to go, and it may be, certainly by Friday, the registration will be there. And thank you. We couldn't have had this with our audience as well. So have a good evening and stay safe. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Suzanne.
I don't know if
Thanks, Judy.